sorry, without a break. So I think we have to go to another session right now. Bye.
Thank you very much, Irina. Yes, we are running late because we have been hearing these excellent presentations of our colleagues. If you all agree, we will go now further on without a break. And I would kindly ask Patrick Goossens, who is the chair of the panel 3, to present the next 3 speakers. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, still here wherever you are. I will keep the introductions very brief in view of the time. And for this third panel, we arrive in another place, being in India. Our first speaker is Debbie Lakshmi Bashia. She's a research scholar and doctoral student from the Department of English at Delhi University. And she will report us on Assamese book history and Assamese linguistic regionalism in the 19th century. You can read more in the program if you want to know more about the speakers.
Hi, should I start?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And hello to everyone. It's evening here. I'm guessing it's morning here, so just a simple hello. Really excited to be part of this conference and amazing presentation so far. Looking forward to the rest. I'll just share my screen. It's not a PPT, it's a map of Assam, which will be there while I give my lecture, just for reference for all of you. Is it visible to all? Yeah, can you all see the screen properly?
Yeah, yes, now we see it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So, like the title of my paper goes, this paper talks about the first printing press in Assam and how the growth of Assamese regionalism occurred around it in the second half of the 19th century. So the nature of Assamese regionalism in its early stage of development was primarily language-centric. Assamese regional identity was sought to be determined by establishing a linguistic identity by agents such as literary institutions, the middle class, and news magazines, in all of which, of course, the printing press played a very vital role. Its formation can be traced to the second half of the 19th century. This linguistic identity was achieved via a process of standardization of the Assamese language. Assam essentially is a heterogeneous region, both culturally and linguistically. The process of standardization of language for a homogeneous linguistic identity is problematic in this case, as it counters with the multiculturalism that is at the core of Assamese identity. I'll look at Assamese regionalism in relation to the first printing press, like I stated, and also I'll try to evaluate the cultural politics of this regionalism, which can be observed in the second half of the 19th century, which fully developed in the first half of the 20th century. The first printing press in Assam was established by the American Baptist missionaries in 1836 at Khodia, which is a little village in the easternmost point by the river Brahmaputra. Now, if you look at the map, it's on the extreme upper corner, but it's such a small town even today that it's not even there in a regular map of Assam. The missionaries were invited to Assam by Captain Jenkins, the then administrative head of Assam. He welcomed them to open a station for missionary work at Khodia. In fact, when invited to Assam, the missionaries were promised all kinds of government aids, including financial and military support. He offered them 1,000 rupees if a family were to settle at the mission, and he also offered to double that amount if they could keep a printing press running for the subsequent 6 months. Here, I also need to mention that it was by the encouragement of Jenkins and the colonial government that the missionaries brought the printing press to Assam. Subsequently, Nathan Brown and Oliver Cutter, who was Brown's associate. They set out for Hodia in November 1835 from Calcutta and reached in March 1836. It took almost 4 months for a journey up the Brahmaputra from Calcutta to Upper Assam. Okay, to mention here, I'll be mentioning the two terms Upper Assam and Lower Assam quite a lot throughout the paper. So by Upper Assam, I mean the extreme, the easternmost areas of Assam, starting from the middle, which goes for Hibahagor, Dibrugarh, as you can see in the map, all the way till the border. When I talk about Lower Assam, it's the western, both the western banks of the river Brahmaputra. So there goes Upper Assam and Lower Assam. So yeah, but the missionaries, although they settled in Hodia in 1836, they had to leave Hodia eventually because of their consequent ill health and attacks from the native tribes of Hodia, and also the remoteness of Hodia from all the other important towns of Assam at that time. So eventually they established a mission in Hibahagor in 1841 and established a printing press there in 1843, from where the first Assamese magazine, the Orunodai, was published in 1846. So for missionary work, education has always been a priority. As such, the printing press was an essential tool for them. Upon Brown and Cutter, upon their arrival in Hodia itself, established the first school in Assam in 1837, where they also reported the enthusiasm of many local boys to study there. The printing press was also of utmost importance to meet the lack of Assamese textbooks. Although Cutter was exclusively in charge of the press, Brown was actively involved in the production of texts. From the press in Hodia, 4,850 copies were printed of Brown's modified translation of William Carey's Bible, as well as 13 chapters of Matthew. Here we must consider the hardships that were faced by the missionaries in order to keep the printing press running. First of all the essential items like paper, letters for the printing press would come from Calcutta. A journey which would on a calm Brahmaputra river would take at least 4 months. Besides, they were now incorporating Assamese characters in the textbooks and in the magazine, which not only they were not familiar with, were also very hard to incorporate, because the missionaries themselves were only using English and Bengali letters. But Brown realized that in order to educate the locals, they have to educate them in their local language, which was Assamese. As such, for the printing press in the first 10 years, 20 years at least, the missionaries had to go through quite a lot of hardships. But the missionaries contributed immensely towards the Assamese language. They especially worked towards re-establishing Assamese as the official language of Assam after the colonial government imposed Bengali in 1836 in Assam. Missionaries like Nathan Brown and Miles Bronson repeatedly confronted the colonial government to prove that Assamese was indeed a separate language with its own literature and history, and not a dialect of Bengali like the colonial government presumed to be. To their success, Assamese was restored as the official language of the land in 1873. Here it is important to note that the vernacular was important to the missionaries in order to reach out to the local people. Similarly, in Assam, prevalence of Assamese in the educational institutions was especially important to them in order to get through the local people. The mission realized as early as 1852, as stated in the summit of the Assam mission, that the Assamese was, I quote, the only medium of communication with tens of thousands among the tribes of its frontier, unquote. Now, this is an important statement because this can be marked as the inception of the process of standardization of Assamese, which eventually led to the problematic nature of Assamese regionalism by homogenizing and forcing one standard language all over the land. Towards the Assamese language and literature, the Arunodai played an important role. It gave momentum to Assamese literary and cultural milieu, which was shattered after the repeated Burmese attacks before the British established their rule in Assam in 1826. Now, the British came to Assam with the Treaty of Iandabo in 1826. After they defeated the Burmese. Before that, the Burmese were attacking Assam in subsequent years, which culturally and socially shattered the Assamese identity and the land as well. So it was the first, Ornoda was the first news magazine of Assam, which although was initially printed with the intention of spreading Christianity among the people, had news from all over the world, translations of awakening people towards Christianity, or translations of the Ahom history, creative literary pieces, and articles about science and social reforms, which covered most of its contents. The language used in the Arunodaya, however, was not literary Assamese, rather a formulation of the spoken Assamese in the region of Upper Assam, as it was perceived by the missionaries. For the vocabulary of the magazine, the editors used an unpublished dictionary by Joduram Dekaborua, which the simplified method of framing words according to the pronunciation was maintained. It is also necessary to consider that in the missionary era of Assamese literature, a few contemporary writers rejected the language of Arunodaya and chose to write in the Vaishnavite traditions of the Vaishnav saints of Assam. Due to the language and cultural barrier the missionaries were undoubtedly unable to do justice to Assamese linguistic tradition, as they failed or were uninterested to consider the literature of the Vaishnavite poets in Assam of the pre-colonial time. Towards the end of the 19th century, gradually the editors of the Arunodaya began to follow the word and sentence structure system provided by Hemchandra Borua. Hemchandra Borua formulated the first published Assamese dictionary, about which I'll talk in a bit. The reason behind this was a large number of Assamese literati showed their dissatisfaction with the language of the Arunodaya. In a memorandum submitted in January 1858, Bronson mentioned of a similar disagreement, as a result of which he believed that the missionaries were unable to get the attention of the local people, and the books they published failed to gain as much readership as they expected. As such, they resorted to a more standardized version of Assamese, which was provided by Hemchandra Borua in his dictionary Hempuk, where he provided the words along with the citation of their Sanskrit origin. Now, Hempuk was published in 1900. Hempuk, whereas a timeless contribution to Assamese literature, raises some concerns which contributed to the politics of standardization of Assamese. Borua believed that the two most integral aspects to learn any language were its grammar and its dictionary. Therefore, he stated that Sanskrit was the most respected language in the ancient times over the vernacular languages. It is therefore not surprising that in his dictionary, his means to standardize the language was by establishing the affiliation of Assamese to Sanskrit and thereby conforming to a Hindu-Aryan hierarchy. By citing that only Sanskrit was the origin of Assamese, he constructed a genealogy which rejected the coming of different language families together in order to create the Assamese language. Borua's affiliation to Sanskrit is not only problematic as it attempted to establish a discourse of cultural hegemony in Assamese linguistic identity, but also for the fact that the language families that existed in Assam deny a single language of origin of Assamese. A few decades later, a stronger inclination to form Assamese identity took place towards the end of the 19th century by a few Assamese students studying in Calcutta who were also affected by the Bengal Renaissance. The pioneers of Assamese literature, culture and society like Lakshminath Bejborua, Chandrakumar Agarwala, Hemchandra Goswami, Padmanath Gohai Borua, Satyanath Bora, Kanaklal Borua were studying in Calcutta when they created Assamese Literary Society in 1872, which was later renamed as Asamiya Bhasha Unnoti Sadhini Sabha. In 1888, the Assamese monthly Jonaki, which came out in 1889, was the mouthpiece of the society. The vision of the society towards an Assamese identity formation was clear when they listed out their main agendas to be to collect and reprint old Assamese manuscripts, circulation of Assamese in all the educational institutions of Assam, to impose correct grammar and linguistic system, as opposed to what was circulated in the pages of Arunodaya, translations of famous books from Sanskrit and other languages into Assamese, to write books on historical, cultural, and social aspects of Assam, to fill out the void in Assamese literature and textbooks, etc. The society's optimum focus on circulation and imposition of Assamese was result of an inclination towards the standardization of the language. The assumed and formulated a standard form of Assamese, which was only spoken in its current form in a few districts of Upper Assam. What is problematic in this kind of standardization is the negligence of different languages that were spoken by the many tribes of Assam, along with the Assamese spoken in the lower Assam area. The course of language for a particular region depends to a great extent on the language that the educated class of the region most recognizes itself with. This is also true for Assam when a new age for Assamese identity was established by Jonaki and its editors. Their cry for establishing a standard Assamese language in Assam was actually what turned out to be the homogenization of the land, dismissing its many other languages and the people who spoke it. One also needs uh, to keep in mind here that the most of the Assamese literati of this era were from the Assamese middle class, which was newly emerging, and therefore they had the privilege which allowed them to study in Calcutta. This kind of an imposition was certainly not democratic. However, since the linguistic identity of a region depends on the language that the educated and the ones with class privilege speak, it is not surprising, therefore, that what is known today as Assamese is in fact a dialect of Assamese that was spoken by a smaller number of people who largely belong to a previous center of political power. By previous center of political power, I mean Hibohagar and the area surrounding it. Now, the role of Hibohagar in the formation of Assamese regionalism is especially important. Um, and also the role of Upper Assam in general. Uh, the missionaries chose to establish the printing press at Hibohagar in their third attempt after their endeavors at Hodia and Jaipur, which was primarily because of its glory as the previous capital of Ahom kingdom. Besides, Upper Assam as a whole appealed to the missionaries because of its growing new economy of the tea plantations by the company. Nathan Brown noted uh, the prospects of Upper Assam with the abundance of coal beds early on his time in Assam. Hibahagar's location of being only a few hours away from the port of the Brahmaputra and its closeness to Dibrugarh, one of the primary tea planters' town, and Jorhat, another politically important old town with regard to the Old Kingdom, made it a convenient choice. Most importantly, Hibahagar was the perfect choice of the missionaries to establish the printing press because it was the district headquarters, I quote, which brought together the most active, learned, and intelligent people and afforded an important channel of communication with the whole district, unquote. Rightly so, a few years after the Arunodaya was published, the Assamese middle class also evolved, primarily from in and around Upper Assam, who focused on fixing, I quote, the Assamese language. Uh, the influence of the Arunodaya in this regard also cannot be missed, as not only the missionaries inspired the next generation of the Assamese middle class to standardize the language of this particular region as the language of Assam, it also saw the upsurge of several printing presses which produced Assamese uh, news magazines starting from the latter part of the 19th century, which primarily focused on standardization of the Assamese language and thereby creating an Assamese identity. However, the imposition of this particular dialect as the standard Assamese language exposes a break in Assam's linguistic historiography. The language spoken in Lower Assam, for example, is today seen only as a mere dialect of Assamese. However, in the history of the language, the dialect from Lower Assam is seen to be much more prevalent in the literature of the pre-Arunodaya period than that of the Upper Assam. Regarding the origin of Assamese language, scholars have observed that the Assamese language for the first time entered and developed in the west of Assam, and eventually it came to be known as the Kamrupi language. Old Assamese literature, especially from the Vaishnava period, also has plenty of example of the usage of this Kamrupi language. In terms of phonetics, linguistics, and semantic forms, the old Assamese literature is full of words and sentence structure from Kamrupi language. The same is true for the literature produced in medieval Assamese literature as well. Like the histories of Ahom period showcases plenty of words borrowed from the Kamrupi language. Besides the Vaishnava literature and literature of the 15th century, history of the Ahoms and history of the Jaintia tribe and the official language of the Ahom kingdom have proven to be Kamrupi Bhasha. Uh, So the obvious question that arises here is that if the literature produced during the pre-Arunodaya period used the Kamrupi language, then under what circumstances the dialect of Hipohagor and its neighboring regions, which is drastically different from the present-day dialect of Lower Assam, eventually became the standard language of Assam. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that this makes one certain that perhaps Assamese regionalism, or what today we know as Assamese identity, would have had a much different face if the first printing press was probably established in some small town in Western Assam instead of Upper Assam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk indeed, and I have learned a lot on a subject I'm not really competent in. We will quickly go on to our next speaker, which is Swati Motra, Assistant Professor of English at Gurudas College at the University of Calcutta. She will talk us about the shaping of the neighborhood of books, the Sanskrit press, and the making of Calcutta College Street. I think you're ready to go.
Right. Hi, I hope I'm visible here. Let me just share my screen just a minute. My screen is visible, right?
Yes.
Right.
Just have to enlarge it.
Right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks to the organizers in particular for hosting this wonderful event. I've been enjoying myself so far. I'll be talking about the neighborhood of books. My presentation is titled Shaping the Neighborhood of Books, the Sanskrit Press and the Making of Calcutta's College Street. This is an image that I took in College Street in 2012. It doesn't look like this anymore, but I felt I should use this anyway. Let me begin. An 1858 letter written by Henry Woodrow, the inspector of schools in Eastern Bengal, comments, "The public owes a deep debt of gratitude to Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar for his recent publications. His series of books are exceptionable, except in point of price. The 25th report of the Calcutta School Book Society, 1868, writes, the largest and the best furnished establishment for the supply of Bengali school books is the Sanskrit Press of Calcutta. Its stock is extensive and its profit by the sale of books is large." This paper is about the historic College Street book market, a glimpse of which we see here in the erstwhile British imperial capital, Calcutta, now called Kolkata, and a printing press that holds a particular significance in the history of Bengali print and publication. The press in question is the aforementioned Sanskrit Press and Depository, established around 1847-48 and co-owned by Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, a very, very significant figure of 19th century Bengal and India, and his colleague and friend Pandit Madan Mohan Tarkalankar. The latter would eventually part from the press under very complex circumstances, leaving Vidyasagar as the sole proprietor. In its time, as evident in the report quoted earlier, the Sanskrit press cornered the market in Bengali language textbook publication. Its catalogue consisted of best-selling Bengali primers like Bornoporichaya and Bodhodaya, written by Vidyasagar, and Shishu Shikha, written by Tarkalankar. Bornoporichaya continues to be a classroom staple 150 years down the line. In this paper, I wish to talk about the entwined histories of the Sanskrit press and the College Street book market, and consider the role played by the Sanskrit press in the making of the book market, the Boi Para, or the neighborhood of books as it is lovingly called today, and the place it occupies in the city's print and urban histories. Now, the word para in Bengali has a connotation of community. It is intrinsically associated with the imagination of the city of Calcutta, often evoked in terms of nostalgia, and its para culture, one where people are tied to each other through bonds forged in everyday life. The Boi Para, then, is a community forged together around the book, constituted through the actions and practices of printers, publishers, booksellers, buyers, and others who live there and make their living there. It is heterogeneous, a sphere in which distinct trajectories coexist, in Doreen Massey's words, always in the process of being made. To speak of the College Street book market today, furthermore, is to speak of it in singular. It is the neighborhood of books, or simply Boipara in Bengali. Now, College Street's place in the urban imagination as a romanticized site for intellectual activity, romance, politics, and adda is the act of sitting together and talking, is such that the government of West Bengal's proposal to reconstruct the dilapidated College Street Municipal Market as the country's first book mall. Now, this is the municipal market as it was around 2006-7. This was met with considerable suspicion. This was the market before its demolition and in a very terrible state, as you can see. In an interview as recent as 2019, Aurobindo Dasgupta of the century-old Dasgupta and Company bookstore said, "The place will be soulless. But I'm worried that people will prefer the cheap prices and comfort of the book mall. So I'm considering taking a place there." While another bookseller, a small bookstore seller, like the one I had displayed earlier, usually on the footpath, he says that Ranjit Biswas, he says that book mall is too expensive for me to move. I couldn't even if I wanted to. The mall, of course, the proposed mall, these are images from various the various representations of the mall. You can see there's a homage to Vidyasagar, and it's named the Borno Porichoy Market, the same primer that Vidyasagar that I was talking about earlier. These are all imagination, and this is exactly how the mall looks like now. It lies incomplete, caught in a legal tussle between the municipality and the developers, subject to frequent complaints about water supply and mosquitoes. In a city like present-day Kolkata, this failure of municipal governance is often attributed to endemic corruption and deemed a distinctive aspect of a post-colonial metropolis. However, it's important to understand the complex nature of spaces such as the College Street book market, constituted through heterogeneous interactions of multiple actors, including the municipal government. Such complexity resists regulation and beautification of the sort preferred by municipal governments in post-colonial cities, produces sites of failure, such as the incomplete carcass of the Borno Porichoy Mall, named ironically after the Sanskrit press-produced primer mentioned earlier. So it is unlikely that the naming of the mall had anything in mind than paying homage to a Bengali icon. As you can see, many icons, and including Shakespeare, is somehow a part of the imagined vision of the mall in one of the representations. It's unlikely that the naming of the mall had anything in mind than paying homage to the icon. It's a common bureaucratic preoccupation in post-colonial India. However, naming the proposed mall after the primer, the post-colonial bureaucrats, however unironically, stuck at the heart of the Sanskrit press's presence in the Boipara. At the time the para was less a neighborhood forged over a book and more a site of colonial exercises in order. To speak of the College Street book market today is to, we speak of it in singular, or it is the neighborhood of books, or simply Boipara in Bengali. This was not always so. The street itself was born out of Governor General Richard Wellesley's preoccupation with the health and governance of the so-called native town of Calcutta. In his minutes of June 16, 1803, Wellesley denounced the Indian occupied quarters, featuring houses that have been built without order or regularity, and the streets and lanes have been formed without attention to the health, convenience, or safety of the inhabitants. The Wellesley appointed improvement committee's task was to ensure that the irregularity of buildings should be forbidden, and that streets and lanes that have hitherto been formed without attention to the health, convenience, or safety of the inhabitants should henceforth be constructed with order and system. The committee, which was supplied by the profits of the Lottery Committee and was merged with the same in 1817, acquired land, undertook considerable restructuring. This is a glimpses of the College Square area from in 1824. And in the next map, we see these straight lines this is from Partha Datta's book, and you can see the manner in which roads have been constructed in a straight line, cutting through the heart of the native town, and slums have also been cleared in the process. They acquired land, undertook restructuring, and built what is known as the College Street and the College Square today. The transformation of the area must have been remarkable, as Partha Datta writes, for Reverend Long remembered it as a site occupied chiefly by paddy fields, with stagnant tanks sending out their malaria. If the street itself emerged out of an attempt to impose order on the chaotic native quarters, then the college that gives College Street its name is the example of an even more significant ordering exercise, one designed to produce a class of modern Indian men, primarily from the Hindu upper castes, educated in the formal British model and fluent in English. The Hindu College, established in 1817, moved from its first location in Chitpur to the Sanskrit College premises in the College Street area, again around the vicinity of this place, in the 1820s, and finally to its current location in 1874, where it stands at the Presidency University till date. The decision to shift Hindu College to this area, as Partha Datta has shown in his thorough study of the Lottery Committee records, was part and parcel of the project of restructuring this native town area. The Sanskrit College was established in 1824 as a part of the company's Orientalist education policy. Now, both Vidyasagar and Tarkalankar, the proprietors of the press, are Brahmin Pandits trained in the manuscript tradition, and they were products of the Sanskrit College. Tarkalankar was also educated at the Hindu College. They had also been employees of the Fort William College and the Sanskrit College at various points of their illustrious careers. As Brian Hatcher has pointed out, during the colonial era, Sanskrit Pandits experienced a range of transformations in their intellectual practices, modes of employment, and socio-political activities. Numerous Pandits like Vidyasagar and Tarkalankar had found their way to Calcutta, where some carried forward patterns of traditional Sanskrit education, and others entered the service of the colonial government as professors, judges, and low-level administrators. As employees of the Fort William College, they had witnessed firsthand the proliferation of print in the Calcutta-Serampur region. So their venture with the Sanskrit Press and Depository thus highlights an astute understanding of the future of print. Locating themselves in the newly restructured College Street area, the proprietors of the Sanskrit Press and Depository represented a connection between the world of the Fort William College and the which was designed to educate employees of the company in the ways of India, the world of the Fort William College, and the fast expanding world of formal education in the British model that they themselves were early beneficiaries of. Now, the Sanskrit Press was built on borrowed money. Amidst concerns about Vidyasagar, the more famous of the duo, there were concerns about his livelihood from his well-wishers. But by 1855, the press was selling books worth nearly 5,000 rupees every month, as per Radharaman Mitra. In 1857, 46 Calcutta presses sold 500,000 copies of Bengali books, a little over that. Sanskrit Press had printed 84,000 of them. Most of the books they printed were prescribed in the Sanskrit College curriculum. Many books were procured by the government itself. The press became the space where Vidyasagar pored over the restructuring of Bengali print. His project of popularizing the standardized Bengali alphabet, he did the standardization, and punctuation could be undertaken only if he took control of his own publications. Furthermore, he also spent his time at the press restructuring Bengali type and producing a new case that would come to be known as the Vidyasagari chart. This was his contribution towards making Bengali print a simpler, more elegant process than what was available at the time. Now, at the time, Abhijit Nandi asks, College Street, the one that we saw now, had not acquired its expanse or its glory. There were only a few educational institutions. What did Vidyasagar see in this area that prompted him to open the Sanskrit Press and Depository here? Now, it's a valid question, but such a question overlooks the long histories of the two proprietors in the area, first as students and then as employees of the Sanskrit College. It overlooks furthermore that by 1846-47, the area around College Street housed more and more printing presses, even if it did not compare in volume with Chitpur, Goranhata, Shobha Bazar or Bawa Bazar, the print economic zones of the city. Lalluji Lal, another former employee of the Fort William College, opened his printing press, also incidentally called the Sanskrit Press, in nearby Potwaldanga in 1815. Ashish Khastagir's catalogue of the geography of Bengali printing presses includes Arpuli Lane, where the Sanskrit Press and Depository opened its brick and mortar bookstore. So by 1817, that area already had printing presses. Amha Street, where the press was located, enters in the catalogue in 1820, that's 27 years before the Sanskrit Press comes into being. Sitaram Ghosh Street, Shimla, Mirzapur Street had all hosted presses like Horachandra Ray's Bengali Jontro, Timir Nashok Jontro, Munshi Hedayetullah's Press, Srimanto Roy's Press, Rosario Press, and so on, before the Sanskrit Press came into existence. Even the decision to open a brick and mortar bookstore, which was quite unique at the time, it did have precedent because the School Book Society had established a retail shop near the Hindu College in 1856. So Nandi ascribes the choice of location to Vidyasagar's genius, arguing that his foresight could comprehend the inevitable future of this area. But a simpler explanation, in my opinion, is that the Amha Street and the Arpuli Lane locations were both located in an up and coming area of print and placed very conveniently to the Sanskrit College, making the supply of textbooks easier. Shukumar Sen, one of the foremost scholars of print in Bangla, categorizes the presses that already occupied that area as Bottola presses, suggesting lower standards of publication, of production. The Sanskrit press established itself as a firm rival of these presses, and the very first text that the Sanskrit press published was a new edition of the Annoda Mongol, which in his own words was printed, the original edition that is, was printed badly in poor quality paper and bore a considerable number of errors. The Sanskrit press edition, on the other hand, was painstakingly produced by Vidyasagar after obtaining a manuscript. Remember, he's trained in the manuscript tradition. It's obtained from the Maharaja of Krishnanagar. It is commissioned by G.T. Marshall of the Fort William College. The Sanskrit College thus sold 100 copies of the book at 600 rupees to repay their outstanding loan amount that they had spent on buying the printing machine, the so-called Sanskrit Jantra. Vidyasagar's telling of this story highlights his training in the manuscript tradition and his insights into the future of print, as well as the considerable cultural capital he had acquired, allowing him to ask for a manuscript from none other than the Maharaja of Krishnanagar. The Annoda Mongol story, this one, as Devottam Chakraborty has argued, stands testimony to the nexus between an institution such as the Fort William College, which would later become the Board of Examiners, and print entrepreneurs like Vidyasagar and Tarkalankar. He writes, and I've translated this from Bangla, on March 1, 1819, when Vidyasagar joined the Fort William College for a second time, the only employees of the college were the Secretary Marshal, the head writer, Vidyasagar as cashier, and the Muhuri, Kalidas Gupta. The college did not actually have any more students, which is why it was dissolved in the first place. So it's evident that Marshal bought 100 copies of the Annoda Mongol only to please Vidyasagar. Now, such a nexus may have helped the press gain traction, undoubtedly, and in the process served the reformist impulses of the proprietors themselves. Scholars ranging from Shivaji Bandyopadhyay to Devottam Chakraborty, whom I just quoted, have pointed to the production of reformed subjects in Sanskrit press primers, such as the Shishu Shikha and the Varna Parichaya. This is an image of the cover of the first edition, part of the Varna Parichaya. This is the standard edition that continues to be sold even today. Scholars have pointed to the construction of ideal boys such as Gopal and Shubodh, who obey and follow the do's and don'ts laid out by benevolent authority figures, while the disorderly and chaotic Rakhal pays the price for his disobedience and indiscipline. Such attempts at ordering the young mind goes hand in hand with the ordering exercises undertaken by the Sanskrit press in the domain of Bengali print and the Bengali language. Now, in the years following the establishment of the Sanskrit press and depository, the College Street area would draw more publishers and brick and mortar bookstores. The Bengal Medical Library, S.K. Lahiri and Company, A.T. Deb, Dashgupta and Company, so on and so forth. The story of the Sanskrit press is but a fraction of the story of the College Street Boipara, constituted as it is and continues to be by the actions and interactions of countless printers, publishers, booksellers, customers and resellers, students and academics, politicians and lovers. As I conclude this paper, and election times skirmish, we are looking forward to our elections. An election time skirmish between left-wing and right-wing political workers at the India Coffee House has generated op-eds and Facebook arguments. It's still raging. College Street mourns it the untimely passing of one of its young stalwarts, Indrani Roy of Mitra Ghosh Publishing. However, as more and more scholars of the book engage with various facets of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and Madan Mohan Tarkalankar's stint with the Sanskrit press, recent years have seen considerable scholarship in this area. I think to consider what the entwined histories of the press and the book market can be memorialized in more ways than the still unfinished structure of the Borno Porichoy Mall. Thank you for listening to me. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. In view of the time, we will quickly go on to our third and last speaker, Kanu Priya Dhingra, she is a research scholar from the Book History and Print Cultures at the Center for Cultural, Literary and Post-Colonial Studies at the University of London. She will present her findings on the Daryaganji Sunday book market and its pirates. So it's another market we're going to. Interwoven is the relationship between this piracy and the location where the books are sold. And please don't forget to ask your questions in the Q&A. It's all yours.
Hi, I'm just sharing my screen. Right, so thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. Yeah.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this opportunity. And I see I don't have a lot of time left, so I'll just start right away. So my presentation is titled The Pirates of Daryaganj Sunday Book Market, and this bazaar, which is also known as Daryaganj Sunday Patri Kitab Bazaar, where Patri stands for footpath. It's a weekly informal market for used, rare and pirated books that has been operating on the streets of Old Delhi for the past 50 years. It's a site for happy accidents where books are found randomly, and these books also carry indefinite value, which is determined by how and where it was located by the bookseller and later by the buyer. And the search algorithms that this market incorporates are marked by characteristics such as unpredictability, contingency, wonder, and excitement, and then the find of the day for the reader then embodies this randomness. In this presentation, I'll look at one such category of these finds, which is the circuit of pirated and duplicate books, or what the booksellers of this bazaar called D-books. And for the past 50 years, the bazaar has primarily been a place for secondhand used books, which includes novels, comics, children's books, self-help books and guides, syllabus books, and so on. Although this particular circuit of piracy has been a major component as well, and which is what I'll be focusing on. To elaborate upon this circuit, I'll compare two kinds of pirated books. A low-price self-help manual in Hindi and a duplicate copy of an English novel by a popular Indian author. The bazaar derives its element of serendipity from the street and from the space of the street. The visually and culturally vibrant aesthetics of this bazaar comprise booksellers, setting up their stalls, and pedestrians and book buyers walking and buying the books arranged either in neat stacks or put together in heaps. And this book bazaar exhibits provisionality and ephemerality in its manner of operation and the elements that comprises. Much like the circuit of secondhand books and the piracy circuit too, this as well thrives on randomness, and the spatiality of the bazaar has a role to play in it. The figures of bookseller, reader, author, publisher, and the book are also marked by contingency, as we'll see. And I'll examine the ways in which such contingency is organized such that piracy leaves its liminality, and this circuit comes across as one of the major occupants of this bazaar. So these are some of the books that are found in the bazaar. These are used books, and these are some comics and old books from the libraries, and these are the syllabus books as well. But this is a sample of some of the pirated books that are found in the bazaar. But this is what I'm going to move on to now. This is my first case. I found Guru Chela in 2017 on a Sunday in Daryaganj at what looked like a typical bookstall in the Sunday Patri Kitab Bazaar. That is a seller with some books lying in front of him on the footpath. Some 90 to 100 booklets had miscellaneous diverse titles. There was one on Chulbule SMS for funny SMSs, a self-help manual called Beauty Parlor Course, a songbook for a singer who was a sensation in the 1980s and 90s, comics and pocketbooks with short stories, alphabet and language skills for children, uh, several religious booklets and titles on general knowledge and also astronomy, and all of this on one stall. And the bookstore was also selling everyday objects such as knives, scissors, pens, wristwatches and their bands, etc. And everything, including the booklets, was available for a standard price of rupees 10. The booklets were yet another useful everyday item. And while most of it was useful literature in Hindi and all the booklets shared a common price, their material condition was not uniform. For instance, not all the booklets were made of pulp pages. Some had glossy covers, and the quality of the pages was also very different. However, there was a shared sense of aesthetics, which is peculiar to the literature seen on footpaths. The minimal aesthetics of the stall did not match with the explosion of colors and content that the manuals infused. And their covers were, catchy to a wandering eye in the bazaar, colorful, bilingual, with foreign models, and, carrying no promise of any relation to the content inside. This bookstall was among several others in Daryaganj, each looking the same as the other and yet not. The seller or the bookseller was indifferent to my interest in purchasing anything whatsoever. Now, why did I pick up this very precise booklet? Its cover resembled that of a candy that I used to relish in my childhood. The candy was also called Guru Chela, and it also had a similar Guru and a Chela on its cover for my entertainment. And it being a digestive, it also claimed that it was good for my gut. The cover of the candy you can see on your screen in the bottom right. Next is the case of the English novel found in pirated format. So a pedestrian stopped at one of the stalls at the Patrikita Bazaar where I sat during my fieldwork in 2019. Chetan Bhagat ki nayi kitab kitne ki hai? She asked for Chetan Bhagat's new book. She didn't specify which one, but it seemed that it was understood between the buyer and the seller. 100 rupees, said the bookseller. The customer took the book in her hand and she started to examine its cover and flip through its pages. Par ye to duplicate hai, sasta do. She said that the book was a pirated copy and she asked for the bookseller to give her a discount on the book. Madam, ye nayi kitab hai. Quality dekhiye, bilkul nayi jaisi, ye behtar hai. The bookseller exclaimed that it was a new book and that it was better than the original. She must note its fine quality, which according to him was as good as any new book. And the customer tried to negotiate, but eventually bought the duplicate copy for 80 rupees. Now, what are my first impressions? Guru Chela, literally meaning master disciple, is a manual that claims to entertain your mind and heal your body. Much like the constitution of the bookstall, the booklet was also an assemblage of random content put together in a book-like form. 16 grey pulp pages stapled together into a brittle booklet. Notice that the book has a publisher, Bansal Prakashan, based in Old Delhi. It's right in the top left corner. There is Raj printed on one corner below the marked price of the book, bottom left. And this figure of Raj, I suppose, is to be understood as the author, suggesting only a cursory yet necessary presence of the author's title. The owner of Bansal Prakashan revealed in an interview that there are mostly no authors and the printers or publishers like himself use generic names for the sake of it. He also mentioned that the content of the manual is based on what sells, that is, the content that is either in demand topically or the content that is universally in demand. The miscellaneous list of contents inside this booklet included advice and information on arbitrary topics such as home remedies for ailments, the rules of healthy lifestyle, information on small sector businesses, national and international general knowledge, and so on, topics which may or may not have any relation with each other. And all of these were placed together in this one booklet. It also had superhit shairi and Akbar Birbal's jokes, and which these two characters may not have said to each other ever. It is probably a booklet for a reader on the move, say for a short bus ride. In terms of paratext, there is no preface, no table of contents, nor a list of more titles from the author or printer, etc. The back cover has an advertisement. a local sex clinic offering a traditional remedy for any cases of lack of virility in men. None of the content or the paraphernalia bears any relation to the title of the booklet. Then what does the title of the Guru Chela stand for? While it is usual for such booklets to have covers that do not resonate with their content or with their intended or potential readers, my postulation is that the cover has a sketch of a guru and a chela in an upside down optical illusion. The title and the image combined could give two first impressions. A, it's an advice booklet, one that will impart knowledge as a guru does to a chela. And B, a promise to entertain. I mean, look at the amusing crossover on the cover. I, a migrant in the city, a pedestrian in Old Delhi, a regular at Daryaganj, did not intend to go to the specific bookstall in the first place. I did buying the accident. I bought this for its nostalgic value and not the marked price or the price in which it was available. In case of Bhagat's new book, new in quotes, the quoted conversation overheard at Daryaganj could have happened at several other locations in Delhi. Bus stands and railway stations, hawkers at Connaught Place, Mukherjee Nagar's book markets for Delhi University students, one of the three makeshift bookstalls in Kamla Nagar market, etc. So piracy has indeed taken over the publishing and bibliographic landscape in Delhi, if not also in the country and across its borders. In fact, allegedly, India's neighboring countries such as Pakistan and Bangladesh are one of the major producers of pirated literature, which gets exported to India. However, what I will discuss in this presentation is its presence inside this bazaar. Now, there are four important takeaways from these conversations. First, the availability of the book. The expectation of its availability at the Patri Kitab Bazaar is something that I would like to highlight. Unlike the incidents of finding Guru Chela that happened with me, and that in this bazaar, books are usually searched for or are bumped into, a customer had stopped at one of the stalls which has laid out such latest titles, making it more likely that their demand will be met in this bazaar. Despite that, she was in Daryaganj, a bazaar known for its second-hand and old books, that is, what can be considered as contrary to a new or a latest book. Second is the identification of a duplicate book. Now, the customer is able to identify that the book was not a new book in its conventional sense. It was a pirated copy. The usual giveaways include misprints and missing pages, faded ink or discoloration of the cover, uneven page indentation, etc. And unlike Guru Chela, it was indeed possible to hide piracy in the case of this title. While there are ways in which duplicate books look different, looking for legal identifiers doesn't help either. For instance, every contemporary book distributed in the Indian subcontinent mandatorily, it carries this declaration in the favor of piracy laws of India, such as all rights reserved, including rights of reproduction in whole or in print in any form. A pirated book may also carry the same note since it has been reproduced in whole, that is, along with the copyrights page. While it also highlights the customer's ability to identify a pirated copy from an original one, it's interesting that the customer demands for a low price and not an original copy. Third observation would be that the value of a pirated book and how it stands vis-a-vis books in Patri Kitab Bazaar and books in the proper bookshops in Delhi. Now, unlike the Guru Chela manual, which was available at a fixed price, there were negotiations made at this stall. Further, the price quoted for the pirated copy was similar to A, what the price for a second-hand copy of the same title would have been at this bazaar, uh, and B, it was lesser than the maximum retail price. The buyer's response suggests that the quoted price doesn't match their expectation. In a way, the same principles of negotiation that apply in the space of a bazaar for any used, old, or refused book must apply here too. The customer expects the price to be lesser than the original price, since books being available at a lesser price is one of the principal features and promises of this bazaar. However, they also expect that the price of the book should be lower on account of on account of its duplicity. That is, according to the customer, the book is neither a new nor an authentic second-hand copy, hence it doesn't deserve the same value. Now, the fourth and the final observation would be that how the vendor reacted. What was his verdict? He said that duplicate is better or better. It is worth noting that in trying to justify the quoted price, the vendor claims that the duplicate book is only better than a second-hand book. In most cases, as I noted, during my fieldwork, During price negotiations with their customers, the vendors of duplicate books do not give up on the relatively higher price of their stock, since they wish to maintain the supremacy of a new duplicate copy or D-book over an original or a used book. They mention that the fact that the book is available immediately must count. So temporality as it affects this bazaar then takes a different meaning in this circuit as well. Now, I would like to highlight about this circuit a little bit. Both these formats of piracy belong to the largest circuit of piracy that prevails in this bazaar. Explained simply, piracy means unauthorized reproduction, importing or distribution of whole or of a substantial part of works protected by copyright. In its most recent rendition, a pirated book is a digitally reproduced text of an original book where not only the content but the design, cover, barcode, and color is also copied. With low-cost technologies of mechanical and digital reproduction becoming more popular and accessible, the variety of books found at Daryaganj has changed over the years. Piracy is not a new addition here. It has long been a part of the bazaar and continues still. And there are two brackets within which these books are found at this bazaar. Pocket books and locally published manuals, and pirated paperbacks. So I'll talk about the first category now. This bracket is where we see books like Guru Chela. Since its early days, this format of piracy has pervaded this bazaar and the landscape of publishing in Old Delhi in general. Now, as against the imported second-hand books, locally produced literature in the form of quasi-legal commodities were also available simultaneously. Of the most common have been manuals on religion and spirituality, and low price entertainment or self-help manuals. A result of the cut and paste publishing economy, these are full of uncited, plagiarized content related to health, medicine, humor, and topics of general awareness. These manuals are still found and bought at the Daryaganj Patri Kitab Bazaar. Now, in the present day, the area around Daryaganj constitutes a microgeography of circulation of such pirated manuals and pocket books. That is a minor local network that has sustained their production and consumption. Adjacent areas in Old Delhi, primarily Nai Sadak and Sadar Bazaar, are a part of this. The latter is yet another hyperlocal site, also the largest wholesale market of household items in Old Delhi. Now, some vendors at the Patri Kitab Bazaar also collected their stock from here and then sold it at Daryaganj later on. So there's a relationship between genre and space that I'm trying to highlight here, and how these get articulated in different languages and genres according to the location of each author and in relation to other literary tastes and stories and trajectories. The locally produced literatures are constituted by the social relations that are active in the given spatial arena. However, it is not its definitive quality. Stephanie Newell has indicated that such self-help literature, such quasi-legal literature, is often regarded as the work of urban correspondents who offer rapid written responses to current conditions in the cities and encourage readers to imagine alternative futures and new pleasures for themselves. The seemingly random content of this pamphlet-like literature is assembled keeping in mind its international dismantling, keeping in mind the ordinary local urban readers who constitute their principal readership. And the authors of these pamphlets have confidently sidelined the said dichotomy as well, as they freely pick reference material that suits their own agendas. And these manuals then become ingenious responses to the flows of local and international commodities and resources in their cities. Now, with the variety of pirated books available at the Patri Kitab Bazaar, there is a co-presence of high and low Hindi and English literature. The content is simultaneously immediate to the local readers and universal in terms of where it has been borrowed from. So even considering Guru Chela, for example, Akbar Birbal's jokes and shairi by anonymous poets are popular and common references for a local reader. All of these are safe choices, or what Bansal Prakashan claims, they are sellable. They're put together for a general reader who is understood as familiar with or interested in at least some of the content, if not all. The compilation then is not entirely random, even if it carries the semblance of that. Now I'll come to the second category, which is that of pirated paperback. A relatively new entry within this circuit is that of pirated novels and nonfiction titles, and these had begun to populate the bazaar since the past decade, which is very recent for this bazaar. In a way, this highlights one of the most recent publishing and reading trends as well. In my meeting with one of the new pirates or the vendors of the Patri Kitab Bazaar who sell duplicate books in their most recent format, he explained that we are new vendors who sell new books. हम नए लोग हैं, हम नई किताबें बेचते हैं. Although in their case, new refers to both books that have been released recently and books that are not in reused or old formats, common at the Patri Kitab Bazaar. At this bazaar, titles by William Dalrymple, Shashi Tharoor, and Mark Mason, among others, are commonly cited in pirated formats. Another more sought out title is Rhonda Byrne's The Secret. At one of the stalls, the following stack of the novels produced in pirated or duplicate formats were lying in neat rows. Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, Rich Dad Poor Dad, John Green, and more Mark Mason, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, titles from Harry Potter series, Robin Sharma, and whatnot. We see here older titles which have remained popular or have regained popularity in the reading circuits of Delhi appeared in pirated formats. In this way, this bazaar becomes a space where you not only see what has been discarded, is rare, is unique, but also something that has had a sustained commercial popularity. So, however, in this market, it comes in pirated or duplicate formats, along with these other forms of proper or legitimate or legal or authentic ones. One cannot say which sells more or which is more present in the bazaar, but the pirated format is gradually gaining better saleability and visibility. Now there is yet another widespread form in which piracy and paperback meet in Daryaganj, and that is novels written by Indian English authors. With the publication of his first novel, 5 Point Someone, Chetan Bhagat had brought a revolution in the year 2004. His novels became bestsellers in no time, especially among the Indian youth, since they mostly talked about their immediate lives and concerns in simple, accessible English. However, it is not just the misery and the adventures of Indian youth that changed the Indian publishing industry instantly. They witnessed a sudden shift in terms of outbursts of novels and nonfiction from indigenous publishers and printers, and such a shift that was more unpredictable than it was planned, gave a rise to newer sites and mechanisms of publication and authorship, and along with it, there also grew a new form of readership. While old publishing houses such as Rupa Publications shifted their focus to the new wave, new publishers, such as Sisti Publishers, came to the forefront to be accessed by new and budding authors. However, once established, these authors were later acquired by publishing mammoths, such as Penguin and Harper. And not just fiction and nonfiction, but poetry too became accessible. And this phenomenon of accessible literature that these new Indian English writers inspired is relevant here because apart from accessible content and easy availability, it is also the inexpensive retail price of these books that made them reach an ever wide readership. However, despite the easy availability and the low prices, these titles could not escape piracy. My argument then is that the relationship between price and piracy not only highlights an author's popularity, but also hints towards a gap and a revolution in publishing. The relatively new category of paperback is an addition to what is known as the paperback revolution of India, introduced by D.N. Malhotra with Hind pocket books in the 1950s. And the premise of this revolution was to make books more accessible in a relatively less luxurious format for a lower price.
I have lost.
Yes.
We have lost her.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. We
Okay.
will. Oh dear. Well, shall I do the questions then?
Yeah, well, maybe we are quite
Quite late as it is.
late, yeah.
We are eating in our lunchtime.
Well, she's still with us. So, Kanupriya, do you hear us? No, now I don't see her anymore.
No.
Okay. It's already interesting to be present from India.
Yes, indeed.
Here in Europe. So the presentation was very interesting too. Ah,
Hi, I think I got disconnected.
okay.
It's
Kanapriya,
all
we
right.
are very late with
Yeah, no problem.
with our program, so maybe just to finish.
Sure.
Thank you.
We do the questions then? Okay, we have a question for Debbie, two actually, whether she has any data on the percentage of reading population in the Assam in the period in question, and whether there were attempts to control ownership and usage of the printing press in the 19th century Assam in order to facilitate standardization of the Assamese language.
Right. Okay. Thank you for the questions. To answer the first one about the percentage of the reading population, I wouldn't be, because readership is a part of my ongoing research, so I wouldn't comment on the percentage, but just to have an idea of the groups of people who were in the reading public. The girls' education was still a taboo that time, and the first school was established in Guwahati around early 1830s. So after the British came, and in Upper Assam, in Shivasagar, the missionaries established the first school around 1841, because the schools before that, those didn't function in the long run. So besides the newly assigned school students, the other reading population will be from the very new Assamese middle class who were officers with the government, and their sons, because women were still not among the reading population, which is also why probably the language of Arunodaya was kept very simple, and the content as well was not very high value literature, because it was still a starting point for the literary news magazine in Assam. So there goes the question of readership. And secondly, the second question was about, were there attempts to take ownership of the printing presses, right? So after Arunodaya, the movement towards establishing Assamese regionalism and Assamese identity got a full-fledged picture in the early 20th century. And Jonaki, the one I talked about, Jonaki was published from Kolkata by the Assamese youths who were studying there. After Jonaki, there were magazines, there were printing presses established precisely with this particular point of view, to establish a certain kind of regional identity. In fact, there was there were two magazines which were coming from two different printing presses, which were fighting about the whole fight between the language of Upper Assam or the language of Lower Assam should be the standardized Assamese language. Besides that, the ownership always would be facilitated by those who were in good terms with the colonial government, because the press was also under the strict surveillance, which is why even till very late into the freedom movement, the Assamese press was not active in terms of talking against the government. It was solely focused on the literary. So yeah, there were no attempts to take ownership, but printing presses were established to facilitate this whole movement to establish Assamese linguistic identity and to standardize this language. And that happened in the early 20th century.
And a question for Swati Moatra, if you found ideological, political and scholarly printing activities to be related.
Thank you for the question. I mean, they can be in the specific context of 19th century Calcutta, the early days of print. The textbook publishing that there has been considerable scholarship on this, that the publishers of the textbooks do have a certain ideological inclination. There is a clear reformist bent to their publishing, and Vidyasagar himself is he is not simply a textbook publisher. He also is a writer of a considerable of political tracts that speak of reform of various sorts, including the widow remarriage tract, for example. So yeah, it certainly can be related depending on the context, I would suppose. Thank you again for the question.
Thank you. We are eating in our lunchtime, but still maybe Swati wants to give a short word to end her talk or a quick conclusion, because there are no questions for her, if time allows. I don't know. Or is she really gone?
Yeah, I think.
Kanu Priya, you
Kanu.
thought, Patrick, you wanted to invite Kanu Priya.
I was just left with the last paragraph. I don't know.
Yeah,
if it
you can
makes
just
sense
finish
to.
if it's okay with the organization.
I mean, is this all right? Because I don't know. It is continuing from the previous, conversation. It's fine. I'll just leave it at it.
Okay, then thank you very much. Thank you, Patrick Goossens, and all of the presenters for very interesting insight into a regional print that's well, from my point of view, very unfamiliar. I'm not familiar with it, so it was really interesting to hear you. Now we are going to our lunch break, and we'll be back at 13:30 Central European Time. That's in 45 minutes, I presume. So thank you.